Crooked River, Chapter 28. After folks left to eat their noonday meals, Mrs. Evans came over to talk to Laura and me, settling herself on the edge of one of our beds. She rattled on and on about the evidence. "Ain't that lawyer Root something?" she said, her never-ending voice. "That savage ain't got a prayer in the world, does he? Not with that tomahawk and that feather they found from his very own head." I could imagine how Peter Kelly would convince the jury otherwise. I couldn't imagine how Peter Kelly would convince the jury otherwise. Not if they were all like Mrs. Evans, who only believed what was right there in front of her, what she could see with her own two eyes. When the court resumed in the afternoon, and Peter Kelly took his place in front of the cabin, you could have heard the trees growing. It was so still. I think everyone was waiting to see who he would call to speak for his side and what evidence he would show, but I believe the crowd was downright startled when he stood up and called on Reverend Doane. What did he have to do with a murder trial? Me and Laura watched as the small, frail man made his way to the front of our cabin, holding tightly to Folk's shoulders as he passed. Reverend Doane had preached the sermon at Ma's funeral, and the cold March wind had turned his lips almost blue, I remembered. "Good afternoon, Reverend Doane," Mr. Kelly said in a respectful voice after the minister was seated with the help of the sheriff. "You are a man of the cloth, correct?" "I am," the minister nodded solemnly. Peter Kelly held up the same plain hatchet he had shown earlier and asked the minister if Blacksmith Nichols had ever made it for him. "He did," Reverend Doane nodded again. "Yes." Some in the crowd mumbled that Reverend Doane was a half-witted old fool who wouldn't remember his own name if it was shown to him. Mr. Kelly didn't even give him a glance. He just studied a piece of paper in his hands until the room grew quiet again. "I have only a few other questions for you, Reverend Doane," the lawyer continued after a long pause. "Even though I know you are a religious man, I was wondering whether or not you are inclined to gamble from time to time." "Gamble?" Reverend Doane answered in a surprised voice. "Certainly not." Some folks in the crowd snorted at the foolish question. They began to shuffle and move their feet impatiently, as if they figured Mr. Kelly was just pulling wool. Why in heaven's name was he asking such peculiar things? I wondered. What did gambling have to do with Indian John and the trial? "Do you play cards?" "No," Reverend Doane answered. "I do not." Peter Kelly walked slowly across the room, gazing at the wood beams above his head. "But if one of your congregation members were to find a deck of cards in your coat, just imagine for a moment they did," he rambled on. "Would they be right because of those cards they found to accuse you of being a gambler?" The Reverend straightened his shoulders and thrust his old chin in the air. "Certainly not. I'm not a gambler and I don't play cards. But if they only believe exactly what the evidence shows, what is right in front of their eyes," Mr. Kelly gave the jury a sideways look, "then if they found the deck of cards in your possession, wouldn't they think you were a—" And suddenly I saw exactly what Peter Kelly was doing. Augustus Root must have realized it too, because he leaped out of his chair like a beach sprout on fire and hollered at the judge. "Stop this theatrical exhibition right this minute, Your Honor. This has nothing whatsoever to do with the Indians' trial. Nothing whatsoever." Augustus Root's little foot stomped furiously on the floor, and I grinned behind my hand. Laura ducked her head down and covered her mouth with her handkerchief, as if she was hiding a smile too. "Mr. Kelly," the judge said sternly, "do you have any more questions for the minister that are pertinent to this case?" The way he pronounced the word pertinent made it sound as if it bristled with thorns. Mr. Kelly shook his head. The judge turned to Mr. Root. "You?" "Absolutely none," Mr. Root glared. The judge waved his arm. "The Reverend is dismissed. You've made your point about the evidence, Mr. Kelly. Proceed quickly with your last witness." The audience leaned forward. "My last witness," Peter Kelly said stubbornly, "is the Indian known as Indian John." I am taken to the talking chair, and my hand is placed on the white man's spirit book. The white man speaks loudly and holds my other hand in the air, but he does not offer any tobacco to the spirits in the book. I tell the white chief and his 12 strangers my name is Amek. My people are Ojibways, and my father is Chief Ajijak. My words are not the songs of a bird, I tell them. My words are the truth.